Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of CPOV Autographs. I, of course, am Matt aka Stormageddon. Before we get into this week's episode, I just want to shout out my Twitch channel because I've started streaming again. It's going to be as regular as it can be. For right now, it's most Sundays, and I am revisiting the Kirby franchise. I'm a diehard Kirby fan, for those who don't know. I have several Kirby plushies. Don't have any of the amiibo, though, but I need to get them. But Kirby is getting a brand new 3D open world adventure on the Nintendo Switch at the end of March. And in honor of that, I've been replaying a bunch of Kirby games, and some of them even on stream, the ones that are on the Switch. So on the SNES and the NES, and maybe even the Switch game that came out a few years ago. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, if you go to twitch.tv/DJ_Stormageddon, you can hit that little heart, give me a follow. If you have Amazon Prime and Twitch Prime and you haven't used your free subscription and want to throw me a sub as well, that's always welcome. But yeah, I've been streaming a bunch more. I plan to try and do some more weekday streams too when I can find the time and double down on the Kirby content or start streaming Fuser again. So if you want to go check that out again, it's DJ_Stormageddon is my username on Twitch, twitch.tv/DJ_Stormageddon. But enough about that. On to this week's guest, the incredible Daniel Cordova. Daniel and I got connected through previous guest of this very show and good friend of mine, Betty Brash. Daniel is a podcast host and a writer and specifically hosts a heavy metal podcast. And I was very excited to have him on. I am a heavy metal fan, as a lot of you know, though I haven't been listening to a ton of it lately. But this interview is full of some surprises as well beyond just metal. Throwing a little shout out to his show name, which is Far Beyond Metal. But yeah, so I chat with Daniel about music. We chat about a little bit about video games, about his aesthetic, how his show started, and much, much more. I'm going to stop telling you about the episode, and I'm going to let you just listen to the episode. So here's my incredible chat with the brilliant, handsome, and charming Daniel Cordova. You're recording?
I'm good.
Perfect. Cool. So it's a casual chat show. Probably go from about 45 minutes to an hour. It's funny. I've listened to a few episodes, but I most recently listened to the Jordan Blum episode, which was great. And your funny thing about talking to other interview podcasters is like you start with a little brief summary of the episode, intro music, episode, outro music. Our formats are very similar because that's just kind of how these kinds of shows work. And it was very funny to me. It's like, oh, he's got a nice voice. Oh, this is my exact structure more or less. Because that's kind of like how these shows go. But like, it just struck because I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I don't listen to a ton of interview shows.
Me neither.
Right. And so it's just very funny to me. But anyway, we can kind of just get started. I usually find it at a point somewhere here in this early rambling. I am very excited. I'm chatting with the incredible Daniel Cordova. We were connected through the brilliant and beautiful Betty Brash on Facebook, who I've been friends with for a very long time. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you on. I've been listening to your podcast, Far Beyond Metal, and first of all, it's great. I love the show. I love your interview style. I think we're kindred spirits in the way we record. It sounds to me like, and my first question is, was the goal always to be very conversational with the show, just kind of like a light chat? Is that kind of what you're looking for when conducting an interview, kind of just having a casual conversation?
Yeah, I think so. Like my goal for Far Beyond Metal when I first started as a podcast, because it was a radio show, just like playing music years and years ago and when I was in college, was basically just to rip off the show Jesse Thorne's Sound of Young America.
Amazing.
Which became Bullseye. So that's why it's also formatted the way it is. And I wanted to be something more than just like, kind of shooting the shit with people and somewhere in between, because getting artists on who just want to chat is difficult. So I'm kind of more on press cycles and people want to talk albums. So I try and find the middle ground where it's not just the same stuff, and I can, we'll both walk away not feeling like we're lightly selling out, I guess.
Which is fair. Listening to the most recent episode as of when we're recording, which was Jordan Blum, was really interesting because I'm a metal fan, but I haven't listened to a lot of metal lately, and so to just hear you both, the most fascinating part of the whole conversation for me was how deep you got into the writing process and him being a teacher and stuff like that. So I'm curious, as a fellow interviewer, how much like pre-show research do you do? Do you dive really deep into the person's work? Do you try and keep it kind of surface level so they can talk a lot about it or you can discover it in the conversation? Like, what is the prep like for your interviews?
I try to go in with a full like Word doc of questions that I have up on my screen, and I don't always get to them. I have a couple bullet points of stuff I like to ask, because the way I format it is usually in future episodes I use parts of previous episodes as like the first band section. So like I have an episode going up soon that's with Ariane Lucassen from Ariane, and in the middle is a piece of an interview I did like last December, just so I can kind of pad it a little bit. But for Jordan, like I've known Jordan kind of lightly for years, so we're able to commiserate about like being metal writers and stuff like that a little more. But for that interview I'm referring to from December, which is with the guy from Evergrey and this other dude named Vic from Silent Skies, I didn't really know that project, so I did deep dives on that and like eventually like learned via YouTube that Vic is like this virtuoso piano player and has been in like weird metal bands, but did some like a Smash Mouth mashup or something. And when I mentioned that, it like really struck him. So I don't go full Nardwar where I'm getting like weird deep childhood scarred stuff from them, but I like to surprise people sometimes.
I love that. Like for me, it's fun because I do interviews here and then I do interviews on my gaming podcast as well. Like if we can get developers or voice actors or whoever, like we'll have a gaming conversation with a talent within that sphere. My favorite thing is we were interviewing Yuri Lowenthal, who is a voice actor. He's the voice of Spider-Man currently in the video games, and he does a ton of other stuff. He'd done a Netflix movie about the Dragon Quest series, which is a series of video games. And when I asked him about that movie, his eyes grew to the size of dinner plates, and like this smile washed across his face because no one clearly asks him about that movie. And he was so excited to talk about it. And so like I can relate to that kind of like finding that thing and then like bringing it up in an interview and seeing like the interviewee light up like, oh my God, you're asking me about that thing? No one asked me about that thing. Because that's always my biggest worry when interviewing another podcaster or someone who's on a press circuit is like, I don't want to always ask them like what their writing process is or what, you know, like the standard questions, because you want to make the conversation interesting. Why? I mean, clearly you've loved metal for a long time. You both have a podcast about it and you write for Metal Injection. Was that the only idea for like, if you were going to do a podcast, since it was a radio show before, like it's got to be about metal. There's no other thing you'd want to talk about? Or was it that just your love of metal led you to writing and podcasting?
I'd say B. When I was a college DJ, I just played like a music show. So I was like the guy who added all the new music to our library and stuff like that because I was the metal director. And when I graduated, I missed talking into a microphone because I would always just sort of BS in between the songs, because metal is this genre where it's like very serious and it's a lot of kind of posturing and idol worship, stuff like that. And I wanted to keep doing the like weird in between stuff where I sort of take the piss out of it.
Sure.
But doing a podcast where you're just playing metal songs will get shut down right quick because you're just putting up other people's content in full. So I was like, all right, cool. I like interviewing people when I was in college for our website, but I hate transcribing so much. So I'll just cut out the typing and all that and then just glue it all together. And that's how I got where I am. And then like metal writing, I was writing for the college blog, and in high school, I got the idea of starting my own thing. It just didn't go anywhere. And I started interviewing friends who were in bands and then kept doing that sort of for college. And then one of my people who sent me new metal was like, hey, I see you write for your college blog. Do you want to write for us? And I was like, sure. And then from there, it went to somewhere else. And then like, I don't know, I've been just at it. It's almost like part of just my life ritual now to do the writing for Metal Injection and then my podcast.
Was writing a thing that you liked to do when you were younger also, or is like when you started your blog was kind of the first time you really dove into it?
I don't know. It's weird because when I was in school, I didn't really like writing, but I was I was talking to Jordan about this on the podcast, and when I was able to like really write about stuff I cared about, I felt like I enjoyed it. So yeah, when I started doing the blog thing in college, like I think it was in high school, I think it was even on a MySpace. Yeah, I just loved doing that, and like it was me just reading Metal Edge magazine and Metal Hammer and all this stuff, and being like, I could do that. I could ask people about guitars, and then when I figured out like, oh, you could write about things you like, is sort of when it became the KSCCU, which is my college's website, blog stuff, that, oh, I could just actually do this for fun. It became a hobby, and on the side of doing college papers, it gave me something to write about that I enjoyed. But I don't otherwise write for fun.
Yeah,
maybe lyrics, but I'm not a singer.
I mean, well, and that's funny. Like, I ran a music review show for a long time that's now on hiatus, and I had my own music blog for a long time. And I always found, well, first of all, 100% transcribing interviews is the worst. If I could do an email interview instead, often I would lean on that because then it's already written and I can just kind of like spruce it up. But like unlocking that matrix code of realizing, oh, I could do this arduous task, but about a thing I like it's like the door's open and it seems so obvious, but until you actually start doing it, it's like, oh, I can do that. I can just talk about music instead of like it's just, I find that it's always very funny with artistic endeavors. Sometimes the obvious answer is staring us in the face and we don't realize it until we like get there. When writing versus podcasting, do you find when the interviewing, I mean, you said you don't like transcribing, and nobody does, I don't think. Does that mean you avoid doing interviews for like Metal Injection? Would you rather like do the podcast interviews instead and keep Metal Injection to like reviews and other things?
My Metal Injection input is really just down to the weekly injection, which is the new album roundup every Friday. I stopped doing full reviews because I talked about this with Jordan as well, where I just like run out of ways to say I like something, and right. To have to do 900 words about why this album just hit me right in the ear is very difficult for me. And that says more about me than the process.
Sure.
And I even have debated doing like review episodes, and I feel like I would run into the same thing. So I need to have somebody on to like bounce ideas off of. But if I'm just like speaking into a void, I can't do it anymore. But I've done interviews for Injection, and I would again if the opportunity arose. But like I pitched ideas to them, and I actually pitched Far Beyond Metal as a podcast for them initially, and they politely declined, saying they wanted to keep all their stuff in house. And Rob, who's one of the guys who started it, has interview thing where he interviews wrestlers and people about wrestling and ties it back to metal, and has one called Metal Injection Livecast or something, where it's just kind of more of a roundtable thing with him and some friends, and they talk about metal, and like they've kind of got their stuff figured out. So I was like, all right, I'll just keep it to myself. And now it feels almost silly to double dip on interviews and do something for them and something for me. Right. So I was like, I mean, they're not mad if I do it myself, so I'm going to do it myself.
Well, that's awesome though that those two separate things can exist, right? Because I find that especially in the indie space, doing stuff for yourself, once you start going to I don't want to say more legitimate space, but like a space that has a larger reach or does a similar thing, you can run into those conflicts. But it sounds like that's not a problem for you. It's separate creative spaces, separate brain spaces for you.
Absolutely. And actually, when I first started writing for them, doing the weekly injection, I was writing for another site as well. And they were just straight up, they're like, yeah, we want you to do this for us. If you want to write reviews, absolutely. This other thing that you're doing for them, you keep doing it for them if you want. Like, we're good if you're good. They were good. Other place was good. So... And like I know a bunch of other Metal Injection writers write for multiple places, and yeah, as long as you keep up with what you say you're gonna do for them, they're cool with it. So we're cool.
That's really awesome. I love that. And so you might, I mean, this is probably an understatement, but you must listen to a lot of heavy metal music if you're doing a weekly roundup for them.
Yeah. I try not to sound too jaded about it, but it's kind of a lot sometimes, and it really hit me in college when I was only listening to metal, where I had a hard time doing it for a while. And like now I'm probably 50-50 with like heavy stuff and then indie and funk and stuff like that, all the stuff I rejected when I was a shitty little kid.
We've all been there.
Oh yeah. like I'm just like telling my mom growing up, like, I don't want to listen to the music you want to listen to, like we're driving around, let's put on rock stuff. And now I'm like, oh man, my mom was totally right about Earth, Wind and Fire. Oops.
But
yeah, like I do get a lot of metal, and it's still part of me where like I'm always looking for the thing that sounds different and new, and in doing that I probably look over stuff that's like technically great, and I try to like, I don't know where I'm going with this, just be like, I know this is great, it's not for me, but like why isn't it for me? Because like you
Right.
see there's all these bands that cross over like Pitchfork and stuff like that where they're like, if you know your metal, they sound like stuff that's been around for a while, but for some reason it clicks there, and good for them. But
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I mean, I've been listening to a variety of music since I was a kid. My dad listened to every genre, from like funk to boy bands to pop music to oldies to, classic rock to whatever, to hip hop. And so I got that kind of music sensibility. But in high school, like a lot of us, I fell into the metal culture more. Like I wore Janko jeans, chains, I loved leather straps, painted my nails, spiked hair, and then long hair. And like, so you kind of go through the gambit of like the metal experience. And now on the other side of it, I still love metal, but I also listen to Carly Rae Jepsen, and I listen to
hell yes.
Oh, come on, CRJ, don't even get me started. Like,
let's do it. Fuck me. Let's talk about CRJ. Where's that new album?
Right?
Dedicated Side C.
The first time I heard Cut to the Feeling, I was like it broke my brain. I was like, oh, this is really great. Oh, this is the same person who did Call Me Maybe. Oh, I was sleeping on this, and like I just fell in love with her stuff. Like, and I love that. I love that about music, that you could be a diehard hardcore metal fan and still love CRJ. And the impression is still, if you listen to heavy metal, if you listen to hip hop, like that's all you listen to. And I love that you're the kind of person, and you're not afraid to share this information, that like, that's not all I listen to. Like, I love metal, but I also love other things. Do you find that people have this expectation from you constantly of like, you're just the metal guy, you don't want to hear recommendations about other stuff?
I feel like enough people in my circles know I'm not just the metal guy, but they're like, when I was in college, definitely there was like the idea that the metal guys only listen to metal, and we sort of like got pushed into our own corner. And then me and the other metal guys would be like, yeah, so J-pop's great, right? And he's like, oh, absolutely. Like, it's a lot of fun. And I'm like, yeah, I've been listening to a ton of Prince, and like, oh my God, now my Prince problem's absolutely out of control. but yeah, like I have been that labeled like that, and it's whatever. Like, there's definitely worse things to be like have pinned on me. But like, there's also the idea that like being a metalhead, you're an angry guy. And that aforementioned guy I was in college with, his background on his laptop forever was pandas. And we were quickly realized that everyone know that we were just like big dorks and like, harmless. And I don't throw down in a pit. I'm terrified of that. No thanks. But like,
the last time I was in a pit was a Rob Zombie pit, like, I don't know, more than 2 decades ago, maybe. And like, I got my ass kicked so bad, I was like, never again. I'm done. I'm too old for this shit.
I'm trying to think of the last pit I was in, but the one I've mentioned before that is so crazy. I was at Ozfest 2006, and a band called Full Blown Chaos was playing. It was like 11 a.m. because that's when those things started. Yeah. And a pit broke out, and everyone was going crazy, and like it kind of opened up around us, and me and my friends got separated. And while we're getting pushed around, I keep seeing my friend Philip, and he's like, hey, help me. And he like, every time he sees me, I don't think he realizes it's me, or he gets caught up in it, he pushes me. So then we go through an entire song. We eventually find each other, and we look down, and my friend Thomas's arm is covered in blood, just like so much blood. And he's like, oh my God, what the hell happened? And he wipes it off, and it's not his blood. So then it's even more terrifying because we don't know where it came from. So we immediately skip the next band and go clean up. But yeah, that pit still like haunts me.
I feel like there's these expectations for people who listen to heavy rock and heavy metal that are just, it's like any other genre, right? Like there are cliches and expectations and all of those kinds of things. I just think it's funny, like most of the heavy rock and metal enthusiasts, friends of mine that I still have now when I'm in my late 30s, are like, fuck pit, no thank you, can I sit in a seat in a stadium and just enjoy this shit? Like, I mean we're living in a pandemic, and so like, please get vaccinated, wear a mask, all that stuff. But like, so there aren't a lot of shows right now. Do you miss live shows? Were you going to a lot of shows before the pandemic started?
Yes, absolutely. Like that has been the thing I've missed more than anything. And here where I'm at, like things lightly opened up late last summer. So like I went to Outside Lands, which is a big festival I go to every year, and that was super weird. It's all outside, so it didn't feel so bad. We stayed masked up the entire time. I went to a few shows. I think I went to one show that could be considered, two shows that were considered metal. One, I was like, I feel like this is how I get the shit, and I somehow didn't, but I was also there in like N95, staying away from people. And then the other was outdoors, and I felt okay then. But yeah, I miss proper live shows so much. Like I'm in a band, and we have a show coming up in a few weeks, and I don't know, it's going to be a very different vibe from when I played shows before. I'm going to be on stage in a mask as soon as we're done. I'm going to be like hanging out outside, exclusively outside, avoiding people. So yeah, I mean, if the new normal is just like I'm in a mask all the time, that seems fine too.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I know you're a bass player. You mentioned before, and it's on your Twitter bio.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about your band, because I don't actually know much about it. So tell folks what your band is, what kind of music you play. I assume it's metal, but you know.
Well, there's actually little to know at this point. We're a fairly new band. Like the show coming up we have in Sacramento at the Den of Sin on February 12th is our first show. And we have terrible demos that we haven't showed anybody. And we're looking to record stuff eventually. But yeah, it's called Aloe, spelled A-L-A. But the A has a circle above it, so it makes an O sound. We're really we're really making a mistake with our name. The SEO is going to be terrible. But you can find us on Instagram, alo.prog. We went the phonetic spelling. Again, we're getting into we're making mistakes, but we have a logo now, so we have to stick with it. But yeah, it's progressive metal, some death metal stuff. Like there's, because I'm me, there's now like slap funk bass in some songs. I'm trying to work in like a trance section to a song because I have a synthesizer. Basically, it's a metal band with no real limits because we're all prog dorks. And so
Love
like
that.
think BT Bam, but not as technical, I guess.
Awesome. I mean, I love that. And I love hearing about folks who are just starting out. I mean, like some of my favorite bands to this day are bands that I heard when they were still just doing local shows and like have blown up since and stuff. And like, I think, and I agree with you. Like, I think the thing I didn't realize I missed the most till I got to go to a concert a few weeks ago, or not a few weeks ago, maybe last month. I don't know. Time's a lake. It doesn't really, it's not real anymore.
I was going to say a few weeks ago, Daring.
Yeah. It might have been a month ago. It might have been a half ago. I can't even remember anymore. But there's something about listening to music live that you can never put in a package. Like even live albums for me, and I love plenty of live albums. I just feel like it just doesn't translate. The information doesn't translate the same way. Do you feel that way about live music as well?
Oh, absolutely. Like I like, man, it's basically like all I really want to do is go to a live show. And like you said about live albums, I do this thing where I run to a band's entire discography and I'll swap out studio versions for live songs. And I think now that we're talking about it, it might be because I miss the live experience so much. But yeah, I don't know what it is. It's some weird lizard brain thing where, hey, it's that guy who did that thing on that CD I have, but there he is kind of messing it up. But this is better.
Yeah, I think it's also something about the energy you can, like, I'm an empath, so like, you know, you can feel that kind of stuff coming off people. Like the last major concert I went to was for K-Flay, who is a hip hop and pop rock performer, and her live concert was like no concert I'd ever been to before. Like it just had this experience of feeling at one with the room, which sounds so cheesy to say out loud, right? But like it's true. When you're at like a really good show, like it's just everybody's in sync and you're really vibing.
No, I absolutely get that, because like we were talking about earlier with metal people, there's this like expectation that they're like this certain type of person. Those people do exist, and unfortunately they do go to metal shows and they're there to like fight people and have a bad time.
Yeah.
The most fun and like the most like connection I've ever felt with an audience at a live show, oddly enough, with Carly Rae Jepsen.
Oh, amazing.
She played the Bill Graham Auditorium in San Francisco maybe 2 years ago, and I went. And even weirder, I went alone. My wife does not care about it. It was just me in like my normal metal attire, which is just kind of what I wear all the time.
Right.
And the vibe there was just so great. Like everyone was like really looking out for each other. It was a super positive crowd. And like I was like, oh man, I wish metal shows had this. And I don't know if it's just like being a more pop crowd or what the deal is, but oh man, that crowd really felt like a community thing.
I love that. I mean, I feel like also like I feel like we're kindred spirits, not just in our interview style, but clearly how we feel about music too. And like this kills the question I was going to ask later, because I like to ask folks who are known for a thing what people might be surprised to know about you. But I'm sure folks are surprised to know that you like Carly Rae, even though there's no reason to be surprised because she's great and the music's great. But is there, being known as a metal guy and having a metal podcast and writing about metal, is there anything that you do or like that might surprise people? I'm still going to ask it, maybe even outside of the music genre. Are there games that you really like, or, is there, books or authors that you really like that folks might be surprised? Because obviously you must like Lord of the Rings because you like metal, right? Like everybody does. And even if you don't, that's even better, right? Like,
I don't get it.
Yeah, see,
my wife is a huge fan of it, and we watched all the movies last year, I think, and I don't get it. I understand like it for other people, but it just doesn't click for me. Honestly, most of what I do is pretty music centric, but it's just like a lot of different genres of music. This is another thing I inadvertently wear on my sleeve. I love podcasts. I have something in my ear, it's usually podcasts. I play Animal Crossing a lot, a lot.
Hell yeah, love Animal Crossing.
I just got the expansion thing, the DLC, and I've been on the island making vacation homes for those stupid little animals and just getting that lovely bit of dopamine when they seem happy about it. I know they're gonna be happy no matter what, but man, I gave this guy an indoor graveyard. He's stoked. I'm stoked.
You must listen to a lot of KK metal then.
If I was feeling more confident, I could play it, but
that's amazing. Oh, I love that. That's so good.
That arpeggio at the end kills me, though.
My favorite thing about KK's music in Animal Crossing is how diverse they really make it. But when they make it diverse, they the composer whose name I'm blanking on, really gets into it. Every song sounds like the genre, but it's not like this, this sounds like metal. He's doing arpeggios and metal stuff. But as KK, it's just, I love that. That sets off the music nerd part of my brain, is that kind of ridiculousness.
I mean, I'll put on Stale Cupcakes just because I love that as a song.
Yeah, hell yeah. So, well, then I have to ask, if you're an Animal Crossing fan, do you have favorite metal artifacts within Animal Crossing, or cool metal stuff that you've put on walls or in your home, or are you kind of more broad and chilled out on Animal Crossing?
My Animal Crossing aesthetic is a mess. I have one room that looks like a nightclub in that it's got a disco ball and the nightclub floor and a wall, but then all the furniture in it is the astrological stuff.
Nice.
My main room, when you first walk in, it looks, I think I was going for a hell in that it's got the lava floor and walls, but then there's just a bookshelf and a couch, and it seems like a living room, but you're in hell. And then I have a room that's I have a room that's inspired by my parents' bathroom. In my childhood home, there was a bathroom that when we moved in had fish painted on the wall, and it was blue, and it looked like you were sitting underwater if you were sitting. And this bathroom in my Animal Crossing home is a fish bathroom, so it's kind of a nod to that in a weird way. But
I love that.
I made my house look like a castle, so I guess that's metal in the way that castles are metal and old shit and swords. Sure.
Sure, yeah. Has there ever been a metal band or band in general that you were expected to love that you just don't like? For me, as growing up listening to classic rock, Queen is one of my favorite bands. For whatever reason, I don't love Led Zeppelin. They're obviously
same. That's what I was gonna say.
Oh, we are destined to be friends.
Are we best friends?
Are we best friends now? We're best friends, Daniel. But and of course they're not a bad band, right? They're incredible. They're talented. But for whatever reason, aside from a few songs, I just don't vibe with them. It's so funny. It's the same band for you.
I have others, but that's top of my list. I've tried so hard. When I was in high school, there was basically a divide with my friend group. There was the stoner guys who were really into Led Zeppelin, and they liked Black Sabbath and all this other stuff. Went to CCR and your 70s kind of straight ahead rock. And then there was me and some other friends that went towards heavy metal, Black Sabbath, prog, and stuff like that. And I think there's still that divide, because Black Sabbath's my favorite band ever. It's the most basic foundational metal stuff, but it still I don't know, does it for me. But Zeppelin, I don't know. It's I I even brought this up to somebody one time, like, is it the Lord of the Rings connection? Because you don't like Lord of the Rings. Like, no, I like Rush.
Yeah, there you
like
go.
That's their deal too. But a more recent band that I just don't understand is, and on paper it seems like right up my alley because I love bands with a lot of lore and just like ridiculous costumes and like theatrics and all this stuff, is Ghost. Ghost has like solid melodies and everything's there, but just don't care.
It's funny how the brain works, right? Like there's something beyond what we even, I think, can really understand. Because I've said it for years, but everyone listens to music differently. Like we don't all hear the same thing for one reason or another. And like, although clearly you and I do, because we both don't vibe with Led Zeppelin, but like,
yeah, we're the same people.
We're the same person now. It's confirmed. But like, I just think it's very funny that like there's these expectations, and like I used to get into fights with people in my circles that I didn't like Led Zeppelin. And look, one of my best friends loves Led Zeppelin, and like he's tried, and like I've given it a real chance. Like we listened to the discography together. There was a documentary we watched together. Like I really tried, and I just didn't vibe with it. And I think what's fascinating about music as a topic, especially for a podcast, is like it can become very easily like you love this thing, but someone else won't love it the way you do because it's so objective. Has there ever been like a person you've spoken to on the pod that you've had this kind of conversation with? Like you've run into a band where you're like, oh, I love this band. And they're like, oh, I don't care for them. Like that you were surprised by, or like someone within the metal scene that you expected would love this thing and didn't love this thing?
It's difficult to think of one off the top of my head, to be
Sure.
honest.
I'm sure, since you've interviewed so many people.
I will occasionally just like overread something with the color purple and my own love of Prince. So like I'll be like, hey, is this like a weird nod to Prince? Because for some reason in my head when it comes to Prince, everyone's brain works like mine. Like my Far Beyond Metal logo is purple because it's a sneaky like nod to Prince.
Right.
Also because purple is a super underutilized color in metal, and it's like my favorite color, but that's mostly like a Prince thing. So like there'll be someone who has purple and I'm like, oh, are you a Prince fan? They'll be like, no. I'm like, all right, moving on. But if they say yes, then we can go deep on a Prince thing because I'm always ready to do that.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, I am also a big Prince fan. I've loved Prince's work for a long time. I wouldn't say I am like he's my favorite artist. Like I'm familiar with the greatest hits, and of course I've listened to all the albums. But like I'm not like
all the albums.
Well, as many, most
Have
of the albums. Have
you listened to Disc 5 of Crystal Ball? I don't think so.
Probably not. But like. So it's funny, funnily enough, talking about that. So Prince is so outside of metal, although definitely has influences, like has definitely played things that sound or could be equated to metal.
Sure.
I would say for sure. Would you ever like do a Prince podcast? Is that a thing like you would ever do? Or is Prince like a thing that like you love this, but you don't want to mix your love of podcasts and your love of Prince?
I've talked about doing something like that, actually. It was basically the idea of, you know how there are all these like rewatch and whatever podcasts.
Sure.
It was either to go album by album or song by song and basically just try and convince somebody how great he is. But it seems like that's kind of easy because it's part of it's like undeniable, but there's a lot of goofy fucking Prince songs out there. And I would love to like talk about those, but also like it seems sort of untouchable.
Yeah, sure.
Like I don't know if I'm the right person for it.
That's fair. What do you say? Like, how do you criticize a Prince song? Right?
Oh, I can do that all. I can do that all day. Like I said, there's a lot of goofy Prince. There's some straight up terrible Prince songs, and I don't like my. I think we come back to my difficulty putting things into words that I like or don't like.
Sure.
So I'm like, oh, Pom Pom is such a stupid Prince song. End of episode. See you next week.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like also you're either more harsh or less harsh about your favorite things, right? Or sometimes both, right? Like, you know, it's a stupid song. You probably still listen to it. You probably would still talk about it or whatever, but it doesn't affect your love of Prince.
Maybe I just need the right co-host for that one, because if I do it solo effort, it's going to be like Bill Burr screaming into a void about purple stuff, and I don't want to do that.
No. I mean, I mostly ask that question because I, as someone who hosts 4 podcasts and produces like 6 podcasts, like I know the podcaster brain. Like, you're never satisfied with just one, and you're always thinking about other stuff.
I have so many others in my brain. I just don't have the time for it.
Sure. I mean, and I feel like that's pretty common. And it takes me back to like talking about Far Beyond Metal. Like, you've diversified that show a lot. Like, it's not just interviewing artists. It's not just talking about metal, but like again, your most recent interview, you're talking to an author who loves metal but is writing about a band's discography. Was that always the goal for the show, is to diversify how people see metal and to like kind of be a beacon for the different ways you can engage with the genre?
Absolutely. Like, one thing I like to do is talk to metal artists about non-metal pursuits or hobbies and stuff like that. Because, like, I mean, metal people also like other things. We like food. We like vacations. I don't know. But I think there's also just so much to heavy metal culture that isn't really, like, taken seriously isn't the right way to put it, but I don't know, I guess welcomed or something, because I briefly had a Patreon, which I then was like, this sucks, I hate it. And then I made those like main feed episodes where I talked about like a heavy metal movie, or like got reactions from my wife on an episode. And I plan to do one of those weird reaction episodes with my mom, because I think that'll be fun for me.
Sure.
And I just like all these weird places where heavy metal pops up, and I'd like to like explore those more. But yeah, Far Beyond Metal is both a song that I completely just took from a band, and an idea that like metal and beyond. Ooh.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how this show started off. It was originally called Crash Chords Autographs. My music blog and previous podcast was called Crash Chords. And it was like spun off of like, I'm just going to interview musicians. And my favorite thing to do in those early days was to bring these musicians on. And of course, we talked about their latest thing and whatever they're promoting. But also, I asked them what their favorite food was, or if they played video games, because in another way that we're apparently now going to be best friends, like, I think it's more interesting to talk to people about the other things than the thing, right? People want to hear the thing, but if I found out why David Draymond from Disturbed loved Hello Kitty, like, that would be just as exciting for me. And I don't know that he does. I'm just making that up. It was the first name that popped into my head. Though I kind of say it. It does seem right. But like, that stuff fascinates me more because it's more like, it's different. It's not the expectation. And I absolutely get that feel from listening to your show. And I think that it's a really cool way, especially for me as someone who hasn't engaged with metal as much as I used to like re-engage with it, especially how I have over the last few weeks. And like, there are bands that you've mentioned that like, when your previous guest, Jordan, recommended some bands, and you said you were writing it down, and if you don't like it, you're going to come back to him. I also wrote those band names down so I could check them out later, because I love recommendations.
I have that in my phone. To be honest, I've not listened to it yet. I was just making sure I still had Black Box, Major Parkinson. Yeah, I still have that to listen to.
But like, I love recommendations, and like, I'm curious, like, do you also love recommending bands, and are you good at recommending like the kind of person might like this kind of thing?
I think so. I remember one year with my wife's family for Christmas, there was this idea where I just like, because I don't know, I was just starting to come around. I gave everybody CDs that I mixed of just songs that they potentially could enjoy. And I feel like I did a really good job at that. And like, I have been the person like, hey, I like this band. And someone will be like, what are others I might like? And then I just go too hard on that. Like, someone will ask for a recommendation and I'll send them like 50.
Oh yeah. You can't ask me for one. Like, I had a friend who, bringing up CRJ again, which is we're clearly going to start our own CRJ podcast, is what I've figured out.
Very into that.
Let's do that.
Look, that first album's gonna be rough, but we'll get through it.
But like, I had a friend who like we bonded over CRJ and some other pop stuff, asked me to recommend other pop bands, but just a couple, and like, I sent them like a list of like 15 bands, because like,
Who you got? So I'm gonna guess Churches. That's one I would have said.
Yes. Well, actually, it's funny. I have a friend of mine, Dan Purcell, who is an indie artist. He's doing his own kind of his own pop music. It's all like homebrewed. Like, he's writing it, he's recording it, he's doing all of the work on it. Put out an EP last year that or 2 years ago. Again, time is weird. That blew me away. It's 6 tracks, and like, if you like the CRJ style pop, his name is Dan Purcell, Purcell. I think it's 2 L's. It's on Spotify. He's a previous guest of this show. Delightful human, and like, it's just the catchiest, like, earwormiest stuff. So I think you'd really dig it. But like, the exciting part is not giving you the recommendation now. The exciting part is if you get a chance to listen to it and then messaging me on Twitter like a month from now going, I love this. Oh, thanks for recommending. Like, I love that high of like, I don't know, this may sound cheesy, but I feel like, and I'm curious if you feel the same way, sharing music with folks is like sharing a part of yourself. Because I don't know about you, but I listen to music very personally. I mean, I also listen to stupid stuff that has nothing to do with me, but I get very personal with a lot of the music I love. And I'm curious if like you feel that way too, especially when listening and recommending music.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a friend of mine, I recommended him the band Biffy Clyro years and years ago. They're one of my absolute favorite bands, and like they definitely are like an emotional connection sort of band. And the way he fell in love with them just like meant the world to me. And they announced a tour recently, and I got tickets, and I sent him the thing. He's like, "Hey, should I see them 2 days in a row?" Yeah, absolutely. So like knowing there's someone else that I got as obsessed with that like means a lot. And like the guitarist in my band, Ryan, I got him into Devin Townsend, who's a Canadian artist who's just unbelievable and super diverse. And in being diverse, Ryan and I have different tastes within Devin Townsend that we like, but still the fact that we both like this one guy makes it easy to like talk to each other about metal, and that's also really cool.
I love that. Yeah, I think like it's funny because I'm in a bunch of different worlds. Like I have a gaming podcast, and I have a TV and movie podcast, and then this started as a music podcast or music adjacent, and like I find recommending all three of those things for me are very different. Like not the same kind of part of my brain engages in that way. Sometimes I feel like with games, especially more modern games, longer games, like story-driven games, I can do the similar kind of emotional read to recommend something, and with movies and TV too, but it just doesn't feel quite the same as music. I feel like recommending music to someone can be way more universal than those other mediums. Like odds are if someone doesn't like Lord of the Rings, they're not going to like Game of Thrones. They're not going to like the adjacent stuff, but that's not always true also. But I feel like with music it's the same way on a certain degree. Like just because someone doesn't like a metal band doesn't mean they don't like any metal, kind of a thing.
Well, also with music, I feel super qualified. Like it's basically all I do. With someone who asks me for game recommendations, I only play the Switch. I played Animal Crossing with breaks for the Mario like refreshes or whatever the hell they called those. That came out last year, and then back to Animal Crossing. So movies I'm iffy about. I have like 10 movies I really like. TV shows, I just watched Taskmaster and The Simpsons.
Nice.
and then we'll like kind of do whatever other shows that we try and keep up with, but those are my go-tos. So music's what I feel qualified to do.
And I feel like you'd probably feel qualified to recommend a podcast or two.
Yeah. Yeah. As I say that, I'm like, yeah, there's like the music ones I listen to and the comedy ones. So if you want a music or comedy podcast, let me know.
Before we start to wrap up, I do want to talk with Far Beyond Metal. Do you have like a vision for where it's headed? Or is it kind of like, for me, for this show, it's kind of episode by episode. The idea is to be a casual conversation, an autograph, if you will, of the person about who they are. So you can kind of like get to know someone through me and then go off and check out all their stuff on your own. With Far Beyond Metal, do you have this like grandiose goal of what you want to do with it, or like this kind of roadmap of where you'd like to take it?
One thing I tried to do one time, and it didn't really work out, but I still have hope, is to basically do live shows with the podcast. I would love to do sort of an interview with a band and then have that band play. Something like that would be really cool. I had this like crazy like blue sky dream about doing a festival where we're like in one corner somewhere there's me talking to musicians who are going to play later, and then on another stage where there's not bleed over, bands are playing who I'm going to interview later, and that kind of thing, which I think is super cool idea. But then also I'm like, I kind of want to see these bands because I'm going to be working. So like I would love if it had more of an in-person presence, but then when I had this great idea to start trying to do all this stuff, everything shut down.
Of course.
So maybe when things happen again, I can try and get my toe wet and try and do that again, because I did a live show at a comedy festival here in the Sacramento area, and it was super cool to do, but like no one really came. But yeah. I don't know, next time.
Sure. I mean, but that totally makes sense, and like it feels like a natural evolution for that show. Speaking of the pandemic and everything shutting down, I have been asking my guests, at least in recent episodes, the pandemic sucks. Again, get vaccinated if you can, get boosted if you can, wear a mask. But, and it's sucked in a lot of different ways, not just the pandemic itself, but all the things that have happened during it. But I like to look in the good where I can. And so I've been asking guests, like, if there's one great thing that you can think of that's come out of the pandemic, even though the circumstances suck, like, a highlight or a moment that might not have happened had we not had this time in isolation, had this time indoors, that you can think of?
Selfishly, a big one for me in all this was with bands not on the road, I was able to talk to people I feel like I wouldn't have been able to talk to before, like some of my legitimate heroes. Like I talked to Billy Gould from Faith No More. Faith No More is such an important band to me, and like he's the bassist and has made such an influence on how I play. I talked to Charlie from Anthrax. Anthrax is like my favorite thrash band. Motorhead's drummer Mikey D. I love Motorhead, and like the songs, the era he played on is like my favorite. So like their inability to play shows worked out to me as a fanboy, and talking to these people was great. But also like just even more locally, like I love hanging out with my wife. That's like most of what I want to do, and like we're forced to do that, but like it's just like different now, and like we're able to find other stuff, and we're more into like trying on new shows or new movies, and just like going through this weird kind of thing in this other way together has been kind of great. Like not to say when if things open up again I'm just gonna be going to shows and stuff like that, but you know, like I don't know, it's been like this closeness that we were kind of like all we have, but it's okay.
No, and I totally get that. I mean, my spouse and I definitely grew closer during this time. I feel like like that only goes one of two ways, right? You either grow closer with your spouse or it goes the other way.
Yeah, so far so good.
Right, so far so good. And like, but I love that. And I don't think it's selfish to think you seized an opportunity, right? This is a shitty situation for everybody, but you seized an opportunity to talk to some of your idols. There's still people on the show that I've interviewed that I can't quite believe that I've gotten a chance to speak to. And I think with podcasting, especially meeting your heroes, it can be scary. It can, of course, not work out. Some of our heroes suck. Probably odds are a lot of them do. Probably. You know, just for more generally anyway. But like, so being able to seize that moment, I think is really great. I want to absolutely instill in everybody to go check out your show. I think that even if you're not a diehard heavy metal fan, but you like interviews and you're interested in music, Dan's show is definitely worth checking out. Daniel, I'd love to give you an opportunity before we wrap up the show to tell folks where they can find Far Beyond Metal, where they can find you, where they can find your writing, like give the whole pitch, the whole shebang.
Sure, thank you. Podcast, FarBeyondMetalPodcast.com. I've been trying to do episodes weekly. Usually they're every other week, but I don't know. People seem to want to record, so I'm doing them weekly. Then I write Metal Injection. The weekly injection drops every Friday, which is just the weekly new album release roundup. And then my band alo.prog, alo.prog, is on Instagram, Facebook, if that's something you want to deal with, but we're kind of not doing well at it. And then I record my own solo music under Ovacord, OVACORD, which is my last name slightly mixed up because, again, I'm bad at naming things. But it's the name I gave the project when I was 15 when I started it, and I haven't bothered to change it because it seems like adjusting URLs too much work. Anyway, that's my stuff. Thank you.
Amazing. I love that. I laugh because like I've had that. Like I said, I host 4 different podcasts. Thankfully, this is the only one I do by myself. The other ones have co-hosts to rein me in. But like that, like exhaustion of, oh, I should change this. Oh, but I don't want to. It's too much work. Like I can relate to that on a multitude of levels. So I understand and respect that.
Well, when I started my college radio show, I used Ovacord as my like DJ handle because I felt like we had to have a DJ name. And I was like, oh yeah, this if I do this under Ovacord, I'll also get more like listeners to my music. I don't know if that worked, but I just felt silly after about a year of being like, hey, this is Ovacord. So I was like, hey, this is Daniel Cordova. And it just seemed like the way to go because that's my name.
Yeah.
And then maybe if I sign and email Daniel Cordova, they'll let me interview people. And yeah. I think it worked. So
good. I'm glad that worked out for you. But seriously, everyone, go check out Far Beyond Metal and his writing at Metal Injection. The last thing I'll ask you to do is we have a saying on the podcast, which I think you'll enjoy because it was born out of my now on indefinite hiatus music show. If I say indefinite hiatus, that means that maybe it'll come back someday, even though it's deader than dead. But the saying is based within music. It's this idea that as long as you're creating something, specifically music at the time, then life isn't that bad. You can get through it through creating. And so the saying is music is life and life is good. So if you could say that phrase for me, we will wrap up the show.
Well, I just like to say that music's life and life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.nat.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors? Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.